So, Jan, you've been listening to all this. You probably are ready to just for me to just let you go. Go.
Well, I'll tell you that when numbers weren't good, it's true. Whether the numbers are meaningful or not, we don't really know from the point of view of the actual number. 16%, was it really 10%? Was it really 14%? Who knows? It doesn't matter. The point is it was really bad. We knew it would be bad, and we know what wasn't selling. What wasn't selling was all of those stores that were closed because the government said you have to be closed, and people didn't want to really go to them anyway, as you just said, and they didn't really want to go to restaurants, even if the restaurants had been open. What we've just seen, though, is the worst month. It's going to be better in May because everything's starting to reopen in some parts of the country. The numbers will get better. Most of those stores are opening at about 55% of what they would have done the same time last year. So that's a real number. And that tells you just how tough it is that you can't get them back in the store yet. That number will gradually rise and we'll be at 70%, 65% before we get to holiday. And then if we're lucky, we'll be in the 90% range by the time we get into the holiday selling season. So that's what that number has to look like for things to be good. And this number we just saw was terrible, but nobody thought it could be anything but terrible. However, we do know that pajama sales were up 150%. What does that tell you?
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Courtney, you know, your beat used to be, it was never boring, especially with bricks and mortar going one way and everything. But you didn't expect, you didn't know this was coming, did you?
Yeah, these are some pretty wild numbers, Joe. And I know when we talk about the government retail sales numbers, we're looking at this month-over-month comparison, which is important, especially when we're looking at April, which was much worse than March because only about half of that month was shut down. But I also want to look at the year-over-year numbers, which I think are pretty interesting, particularly when you look at the food and beverage and the grocery sub-segment. So grocery store sales were down 13% in April, which might be surprising to some, but if you think about that hoarding and that stock-up behavior that we saw in March, that kind of makes sense. Maybe you didn't have to buy as much when you went to the store in April as you did in March, but you still bought more than you did last April because grocery store sales were actually up 13% from last April. So I think that might be indicative of behavior that we've seen, and similar commentary from the likes of a Costco when they were talking about food and stock-ups and sort of the patterns of behavior. The other interesting point, though, is we've been hearing a lot about strong sales in the home areas. People are sitting at home looking around for things to sort of improve. I'm talking more about home furnishings, not so much home improvement. But that wasn't a good number. Down 59% in April from March, down 66% year over year. So I wonder if there's a little noise in there and if that might shake out. I agree with Rick and Steve that I just don't know how much we can put into some of these numbers. We're going to have to see over time how this plays out.
Jan, JCPenney, I mean, it's going to keep happening, I guess, right?
Well, J. Crew already filed. Neiman's already filed. We know that Stage already filed. And Penny's will file. And we'll have multiple, well, John Marvado's filed, Jay Hilburn filed. We've had a lot of retailers already file. And we're going to have thousands and thousands of stores that only reopen long enough to go out of business. So that was already happening. We knew there was going to be shakeout in this industry. This started way back when, 2014, I was on your show saying we're going to see 50% of non-bar, non-retail sales online by 2030. Now it's going to be by 2025. I was saying we'll see 10,000 stores a year close for the next 10 years. Now we're going to see 50,000 stores close this year. It's all just being accelerated by COVID. But there's no surprising things going on here. The retailers that were struggling are continuing to struggle, and they're just struggling harder now because cash flow went to zero for a lot of them. That's never happened before in the history of retailing. If you were down 10% in a recession, it was a big deal. Now it's gone to zero for some long period of time, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever. And even when you come back, your cash flow is going to be 50, 60% of what it normally was. You can't make a living there. So you continue to see people fail even once we start to put the stores back together. This is just an acceleration of the trend. We're going to go online. We already knew that. We're going to go digital. We already knew that. We're going to go to cashless payments. We already knew that. It's just going to come a lot faster since COVID is pushing that so hard with the consumer, because now the consumer also doesn't feel safe. They don't just want convenience now. They want convenience and safety. And that's harder to deliver, and it's expensive to deliver. So the cost structure is also going to get worse for all these retailers as they have to do all of these things to make the consumer feel more comfortable.
All right, final words, Courtney. Then we're going to go.
Yeah, I think we're just going to have to continue to watch. We're going to have to watch this sector, Joe, and I totally agree with what Jan is saying. It is not that COVID-19 and Amazon killed all retail. These were trends that were starting to happen, and this is an accelerant. It's like putting lighter fluid on a fire that was already burning and smoldering for quite some time.
All right.